Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 20th of September of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians, according to information we have, begun full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and basically to defeat the Ukrainians completely, and probably to begin the end of the special military operation or something like this. First, let's talk about the fire anomalies. As you can see, the entire territory was set on fire by the Russians. Hundreds of artillery strikes, hundreds of FABs arrived in this area just for the previous 24 hours. The Ukrainians are saying that there is a real disaster, that the Russians are pushing, that the Russians are endless, significant number of armored vehicles, personal carriers. The Ukrainians are about to be finished with the munition, with supply support, so everything is coming to an end according to pro-Ukrainian sources. As for geolocations, during the previous 24 hours, we have a lot of FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian positions in the city of Vuhledar itself, and as you can see, the Russians began using the Russian analog of flamethrower drones. This is the second video since the beginning of the usage of this technology. So as you can see, the Russians are not perfect yet. They're improving. Most likely soon they will be able to improve their drones completely, but for now they have what they have. In the northern direction, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the city of Novoukrainka. Significant number of FABs arrived in this area. But as for the main direction, the main activities are taking place not in this part of the South Donetsk direction, but on the line between Georgievka, Maximilianovka, and the city of Kurakhove itself. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians destroyed significant number of artillery forces that were trying to slow the Russians down. Most of these artillery systems of the Western productions were discovered and destroyed by the Russians before the beginning of offensive, and then the Russians began attack. Once again, as you can see, according to the fire anomalies, the main part of fire anomalies is taking place between the city of Kurakhove, the city of Alexandropol, and the western part of Maximilianovka. So after very powerful artillery preparation, the Russians began full-scale offensive operation along the railways, trying to move further in the western direction from the town of Ostra, and as a result of attack, the Russians entered the prison, Selydove prison number 82. We've been talking about this prison for a very long period of time, and as you can see, the Russians entered. The Russians managed to dig in deeper, and currently, according to information we have, there are very heavy clashes exactly on the territory of the prison. So this information was confirmed mainly by pro-Russian sources. We haven't received any updates or any confirmations from pro-Ukrainian sources or from neutral sources, but they still haven't completed their updates. Maybe they will show us the same thing probably within the next few hours, or maybe by the time you watch the video, you will receive updates from different neutral and Ukrainian mappers. Once again, the Russians, let's say, broken through the Ukrainian defense belt, improved their position significantly, and if summarize everything what pro-Russian sources are telling us, by the evening of the 20th of September, so something like this is already under complete Russian control. Obviously, this is significant progress. The Russians are pushing towards Kurakhove from the east, the Russians are pushing towards Kurakhovka from the south, and the Russians are trying to encircle the Ukrainian positions in Maximilianovka. So obviously, the main goal and the main purpose of Russian attack is to take under control the village of Maximilianovka and to make something like this. If the Russians are able to do this, then the Russians will regroup for a while. It will take probably a few days, maybe 1 week. And after regrouping, the Russians will continue moving further in the western direction with the purpose to take under control the first buildings of the city of Kurakhove, and the most important, to take under control the village of Ostrivskaya. So for the next week, if the Russians are able to secure this territory very fast, for the next week, the Russian purpose and the main Russian goal is to take under control the village of Ostrivskaya, and this is going to be complete disaster for the Ukrainians that are located in the villages of Kurakhovka and Girnik. As for Girnik, we still haven't received anything that can confirm additional Russian progress. I'll remind you that according to information we have, yesterday the Ukrainians withdrew their positions in the eastern part, and currently the eastern part is in complete Russian control and the Ukrainians control just the western part. So it's already a cauldron. It's very difficult to talk, of course, about the number of forces that Ukrainians have in this direction, but as for pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Ukrainians withdrew their positions in the fields a long time ago, and currently the line of combat contact and the edge Ukraine positions are going along this road between the city of Krasnogorovka and the village of Zhelana Pirsha. So this is the border, this is the line of combat contact, attacked, and this is the edge positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. We still have this part as colored with yellow color, but according once again to pro-Ukrainian sources, there are no more Ukrainians here. The main Ukrainian forces are located exactly in this point. And as I understand, according to the latest updates about the situation on the territory of the prison number 82 and in Gostr and Maximilianovka, most likely the Ukrainians will finish their evacuation during the next 2 or 3 days. If they stay longer in this Cauldron and these positions, then significant number of Ukrainians would be encircled. So just 2, 3, 4 days and this territory will be abandoned by the Ukrainians. It's logical if they don't abandon this territory during the next 3-4 days, then they're gonna face another disaster. Now let's move further. The Russians began full-scale offensive operation from Kupyansk towards Selydove. The Russians are trying to encircle and attack the stronghold, the city of Selydove, from the south. This is approximately the direction of Russian attack, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. So according to pro-Russian sources, a lot of trenches, a lot of fortifications, including this stronghold, were captured by the Russians, and this information confirmed by 2 reliable pro-Russian sources. As for the different resources, we have additional report that the Russians got under control the coal mine. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that according to different pro-Russian sources and different Western military experts, this is the territory that was already captured by the Russians as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours. As you can see, significant progress, and as you can see, summarizing everything, the Russians are trying to catch the Ukrainian army inside of this Cauldron, and if this information about the Russian progress in Selydove and Kursk is correct, then I believe we need to expect that during the next few days the Russians will turn their direction to in the southwestern direction with the purpose to take under control the villages and the settlements that located on the line between Novodmitrievka, Kreminna Balka and Sukurne. If the Russians are able to do this, then the distance, that the corridor and that escape road is going to be less for the Ukrainians, and obviously the entire this territory would be under complete Russian FPV drone control and artillery control. The one thing I know for sure, I don't know, we don't know, nobody can tell for sure whether the Russians are able to create the Cauldron for the Ukrainians in this part or not, but we know for sure that this is exactly what the Russians are trying to do. They try to catch the Ukrainian forces, they try to catch as many as possible forces, and if the Russians are able to take in the Cauldron around 2, 3, 4,000 soldiers, this is going to be a big disaster, significant media victory for the Russians, and catastrophe and disaster for the Ukrainians. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Pokrovsk. The Russians are bombing the city of Pokrovsk heavily. Lots of explosions took place during the previous 24 hours on the territory of the city itself and the territory of the main roads, supply roads, and so on. And we have lots of geolocations of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainian communication equipment on the southeastern part. So currently we can't tell for sure whether the rule of Russian drone and Russian infantry works in the same direction, but according to the rule we use in this area, if the Russians began FPV droning the southeastern part of Pokrovsk, maybe the Russians are planning to begin moving in this direction as well. So for now it's very difficult to understand, but everything is possible right now because the Ukrainians are not in very good conditions right now. Now let's move further and let's talk about Toretsk, New York agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the west, to the west of Vuhledar, New York, and as a result of clashes the Russians got under control this stronghold, and this information was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian mappers. We are waiting for videos to confirm this, so for now we are going to keep this territory as contested area. This is very important because as you can see there is a very powerful and dense network of the fortifications. We're talking about these strongholds, and 2 strongholds of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of 8 were already captured. So now the Russians will try to move further in the northern and the western directions with the purpose to take every single stronghold under control. And as soon as the Russians are able to do this, and I have no doubts that they're able to do this, then they will be able to move further in the northern and in the western direction, trying to improve their positions and to attack Konstantinovka from behind. So let's say trying to develop and to move their positions in this way. As for Toretsk itself, every single day we continue receiving additional updates. So almost, if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of months, we're going to see significant number of flags that are moving from the east to the west. One flag, another flag, another flag. So almost every single day we got another flag. And today we got the flag as well. And according to information we have, the Russians, according to pre-Ukrainian sources, the Russians improved their positions in the city of Toretsk itself. So, which means that tomorrow we're going to receive additional flag. And probably tomorrow the Russians will cut additional piece of cake in this part. Maybe the day after the Russians will get another piece of cake, and so on. So they will cut Toretsk into many pieces, and they will move further, deeper and deeper until they reach additional stronghold or cut additional positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, or the Ukrainians, until the Ukrainians are defeated and decided to withdraw their positions completely towards the city of Konstantinovka. Klishchevka. We continue receiving a lot of dates. If you remember, we were talking about this situation since the beginning of September. First, the Russians reached the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal to the west of the city, of the village of ruins of Klishchevka. The Russians captured this territory. Then the Russians improved their positions to the north and managed to cross Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. We're talking about the 5th Assault Brigade, and we were expecting when the Russians will start their offensive between Klishchevka, Zelenopolye, Kurdyumovka this way. And today we start receiving first updates. According to pro-Russian mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over this part as well. So currently something like this is taking place exactly in this part of Klishchevka direction, and the Ukrainians some rearguard forces were left by the Ukrainians in this dense network of the fortifications, in this complex network, and the rest withdraw their positions towards Konstantinovka. So this is a very poor situation for the Ukrainians. Currently they still haven't managed to stabilize the situation, but we know for sure that Ukrainians have force, at least they had force months ago. Now we don't know for sure because lots of units were redeployed to the Kursk offensive, where the Ukrainians are suffering significant losses every single day. Makiivka, the south in Kupyansk direction, the Russians continue their offensive. The Russians began moving along Zheribets river to the south, and the Russians are moving towards the same river from the east. And the first and the main target of the next Russian step, of the next Russian sprint, is to take under control the village of Nevska from the north by attacking the village from the north and from the east. We have changes on the ground. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were withdrawing the Russians to the east of Nevska, and there are lots of episodes. Some of them were geolocated, and one of the episodes was geolocated exactly in this point, and based on this video I have adjusted the map. In the vicinity to the south of Makiivka, we have significant number of FPV drone attacks from the Ukrainian sources. We started receiving updates from this territory probably 2 days ago, and almost every single day we got another video how the Ukrainians were droning the Russians. So based on several videos that been receiving for the previous few days, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor, and the farms to the south of Makiivka were captured. There is just small residential part left. Maybe the Russians, according to different mappers, this part was also captured by the Russians. So anyway, the time, sooner or later, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this information, will provide us additional update. As for the northern Kupyansk direction, for the first time probably for the previous 2 or 3 weeks, we haven't received anything about additional stage of Pishana flower. During the previous 24 hours, the flower of Pishana haven't bloomed, as you can see. But the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces along the river Oskol. Lots of artillery strikes, lots of aviation strikes. The Ukrainians, as I see, they decided not to even to talk about this, about Russian aviation superiority, as you can see. And I would like to point your attention that we stop receiving any videos, any geolocations, and any updates about the work of Ukraine Patriot systems or air systems. Most likely the Ukrainians don't have them at all, or they're trying to keep them for some super purposes, some period of time, and even the Ukrainians don't know for sure when exactly this time is going to come. As for the Kursk offensive Suji direction, as you can see, we have a lot of icons in this area. And the main icons are coming from the southeastern part of Suja, from the western part of Suja, and from the northeastern part of the Suja. So let's discuss in details, and the most important updates are coming from the village of Sverdlovka, Libedivka, and so on. As you can see, we have lots of icons, and most of them belongs to the pro-Russian sources. A lot of reports from reliable sources on the ground, some changes on the map according to different reliable Russian mappers, some different reports from pro-Ukrainian sources, some complaints, and many other things. And if we summarize everything that we received today exactly from this territory, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over this territory, over this significant number of fields, fortifications, towns, and villages, and significant progress, as you can see. The Russians managed to reach the western outskirts of Sverdlikova, and currently there are very heavy clashes exactly for this territory. This is the vital question for the Ukrainians to hold their lines exactly in this point, because the most of the main logistic roads, the main logistic, let's say, lines are going exactly through the village of Lebedivka and Lyubimovka. And if Ukrainians lose this bridgehead between these two villages, the Ukrainians will lose the entire Suja direction. So let's project that the Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to enter this territory and to force the Ukrainians to fall back to Kazachia Loknya or to the city of Suja. So let's add additional colors. So let's assume the Russians managed to restore control over this territory. In this case, the Ukrainians that are currently located to the north of this territory, we're talking about the fields in Novoivanovka, Leonidovka, Alexandria, Viktorovka, Nova, Sorochina, Orlovka, Pogribki. These Ukrainians, these units of the armed forces of Ukrainians will lose any possibilities for evacuation. For them, the only way to do this is to go to the east, to Viktorovka, then to Mala Loknya, then to the south Kazachia Loknya, and then to Suja. But I have some doubts whether this road is safe for the Ukrainians. Most likely the Ukrainians will suffer significant losses. Furthermore, don't forget that according to information we have, Mala Loknya remains under complete Russian control. Yes, the Russians there are in Cauldron, they are encircled, but Ukrainians still haven't managed to take under control this territory, and this is the biggest problem. If the Ukrainians managed to take this village under control, in this case they would be able to create some safe road at least for evacuation, but for now they don't have even this. And we continue receiving different videos of how the Russians are hunting and destroying the Ukrainian vehicles. Even this is a very important video, because this event took place exactly along possible Ukrainian evacuation road if everything goes bad, if everything goes not according to plan. And this video shows that the Ukrainians don't have safe roads and possible evacuation road. The vehicle was destroyed on possible Ukrainian evacuation road. Now, furthermore, we have additional reports from this part. The Russians, if you remember, during the previous days took under control Borky. Now they're trying to move further, and the Russians are basically trying to clear and to destroy everything on their way to the village of Plokhova. According to information we have during the previous few days, we got reports that the Russians began offensive in Plokhova, but most likely those were clashes between Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group. Anyway, the Russians are moving there. It's just a matter of days when exactly the main Russian regular army will enter the territory. So we see, let's remove these icons, these fields, areas that we added about Russian control. Anyway, if we summarize everything, our team decided to keep the territories that the Russians managed to restore as a result of Kursk counteroffensive. So since the beginning, the Russians managed to restore these villages, this part. The Russians cut this salient. The Russians kept control over Mala Loknya. Now the Russians managed to restore control over Ruskaya Konopelka. In this video we can see the Ukrainians that were after withdrawing the Russians on the territory of the village. I'll remind you that a few days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, we got the video how the Ukrainians were abandoning their positions. A very big group of Ukrainians were on the 11th of September were running away from the village of Ruskaya Konopelka. They were ambushed and attacked by the Russians, and now we received geolocation that confirmed Russian control. So we are not saying about that the Russians restored 50% of Ukraine Ukrainian progress, but obviously 20 or 25% of the territories were restored by the Russians as a result of counterattack, and the Russians are not stopping. They're not going to stop. They're moving. If we add the territory around the Sverdlikova and Lebedevka, then probably the territories that the Russians managed to restore will reach 30-35%. So it's significantly big numbers. Obviously, the Ukrainians lost initiative completely. The Ukrainians, that's why, this is the reason why the Ukrainians are sending more and more forces exactly in the Kursk direction. First goal for the Ukrainians to keep the territories until the 26th of September, because on the 26th of September, Zelensky is going to provide his victory plan to Biden, Harris, and Donald Trump. And sources are saying that the plan is very good. But we got today first updates. According to Yermak, the second person in Ukraine, the plan means that Ukrainians will ask NATO countries to get involved inside of the conflict and to begin real clashes with the Russians. So Zelensky thinks that this is the only way to stop the Russians, and the other way Ukrainians will not be able to hold their lines. So I will see what is going to be, but obviously very interesting. The Ukrainians made the biggest mistake when they decided to slow down the Russians by their attacks towards the village of Veselye with the purpose to take under control Glushkova. Today we got additional videos of how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian forces. They were using smoke screens for these purposes, but as for now, the Ukrainians haven't managed to cross even 5 kilometers lines from the border. Their tanks, vehicles stacked on the first areas without any possibilities to move further. The Russians have already destroyed significant number of vehicles and personal of armored forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainians continue suffering losses, and summarizing everything without going through every single geolocation, this is the second Rabotina. This is the second Rabotina, and for now, Ukrainians don't want to accept this. They still think that they can do the same thing as they made during the first days of clashes in Sudzha direction, but this is the second Rabotina. I'll remind you that during the battle for small village of Rabotina, the Ukrainians lost around 100,000 soldiers and significant number of armored vehicles and personal carriers. So this is the same story. The Ukrainians stuck in the vicinity of one village by the name of Veselye, and by the way, if we to translate the village of Veselye in English, it means funny. It's funny village. It's very funny to have funny village title when the Ukrainians are losing so many vehicles in this area, but it's not so funny, obviously. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.